Good morning, you're watching World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Anna Kalczyńska. As the war in Ukraine grinds into its fourth year, peace talks remain stalled with Russia, unwilling to agree to a longer truce than the proposed 3 days for the sake of its Victory Day. Having signed the minerals deal with Ukraine, the US appears hesitant about pursuing its role as chief mediator, with Donald Trump more and more frustrated with unresponsiveness on the part of the Kremlin. In this context, peace in Ukraine feels like an elusive dream rather than a goal to be achieved in a matter of weeks. Where are we in the process of seeking a solution to this irrational war? We're joined now with Olexiy Haran, a research advisor, Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Good morning, sir, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So we hear Donald Trump saying that we are closer to reaching a peace with one side, not so much with the other, in his latest interview. So the Kremlin apparently chose to wait out the West. Is it a battle of nerves in your mind? And who holds the cards to allude to Donald Trump's rhetoric?
Look, first of all, if Putin would like to stop a war, so he will do that. But what is needed for that? Definitely, it's necessary to show to Putin that he cannot win and that he can lose. What is important for that? Well, language of force. So supplies of weapons to Ukraine, increasing sanctions against Russia. Do we see it with current administration in Washington? Well, you know the answer, no, unfortunately. So now we signed so-called a deal with the United States on rare earth minerals. So to some extent, it changed the atmosphere in relations between Ukraine and the US. So at this point, Trump now is talking, and his administration is saying, and actually they are starting to supply new weapons to Ukraine. New weapons, I mean, because so far the supplies of weapons to Ukraine was according to what President Biden decided. But this is, this is ending what was suggested by Biden and approved by Congress. So the question for us was whether Trump will continue to supply weapons to Ukraine. Well, finally we received the answer after signing of this deal. Yes, the US will continue to supply weapons to Ukraine, but we need to buy it. So it's not for free now. We need to buy it. So regarding sanctions from the United States, yes, we know that actually in Washington, the package of new sanctions is prepared, but we are waiting for the decision of Trump. It depends totally on him. I've just listened to the interview of former Ukrainian ambassador to the US, Mr. Olexiy Haran, and he's saying that he's not very optimistic about position of the US because, according to him, and I actually agree with that Trump, he's still thinking about improving relations with Russia. Mm-hmm. So yes, we see the change of tone in administration approach to the war. Positive change, but there are so many confusing signals which are coming from Washington. So we don't know how Trump would behave. And
you're right.
We appreciate the support from Europe is increasing right now, but the question whether it will be enough.
Just as you rightly pointed out, nothing will happen without the Russian president's consent. And in his latest interview, Vladimir Putin said that Moscow has the strength and the means to bring its unprovoked war on Ukraine to a logical conclusion. It's a quote, speaking to national Russian media. So what do you make of it? What does he mean by that? The advancements on the ground are poor. So the main strategy has been attacking civilian infrastructure.
Right, and actually the full quote is that Putin is saying, well, I don't need to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine because we will win anyway. I think we should analyze it in a broader sense because actually, Putin, from the beginning of this war, Putin was engaged in nuclear blackmail, not only of Ukraine, but first of all, blackmailing the West, And it's very, very cynical, to talk about nuclear weapons in Ukraine after Ukraine gave up the third nuclear arsenal in the world, and Russia promised not to attack Ukraine, not to threat Ukraine with nuclear weapons. So you see how cynical, he is. So basically, I think that, the continuations that what Putin said about, future victory in Ukraine, I think this is a bluff, This is just to show that I am strong. And all these attacks on Kiev and other cities during recent days, well, Putin is increasing stakes. If he would be engaged in some kind of ceasefire or which he doesn't want at this point, then he would like to talk from the position of strength. So nothing surprising, in what Putin is saying, with all these lies and blackmails, typical Russian approach. By the way, you know that I am now in Kiev, and I'm always in Kiev actually. And no recent bombardments of Kiev were just nearby my vicinity and also vicinity of my daughters. So I feel it, personally, what Russia is trying to do to intimidate Ukraine, to intimidate civilians, but also to intimidate the West. Again, typical Russian position.
So what could be the Russia's objectives right now? Because Volodymyr Zelensky keeps on saying that the world is tired with Kremlin's lies, but without Moscow willing to talk, there's no way for the peace talks to advance. So apart from reiterating the maximalists' objectives, what does actually Vladimir Putin want at this point of the war?
Well, at this point, he still believes that it's possible to win the war in Ukraine. But he relies, as I have said, he relies on a potential that U.S. Will not continue to support Ukraine, that finally Russia and the US will make a deal. So he relies on that. And, the Europe would be not very effective. We see all these talks about, peacekeepers in Ukraine or military mission in Ukraine. Europeans are still saying, okay, after Ukraine and Russia reach a peace agreement, then we can deploy our forces in Ukraine to guarantee this agreement. So what does it mean for Putin? I don't need, any peace agreement with Ukraine, and Europe is weak. Europe is weak because they cannot agree on sending the mission to Ukraine. So therefore, Putin thinks that he can continue pressure on Ukraine. There would be a combination of different factors. It's not only attacks on the ground. It's also attacks against civilian objects. And well, I lost my mind. Sorry about it.
All right, so I will go back to the strategy of the United States. What do you make of the announcement and reversed withdrawal then from the negotiations on the part of the White House? Where are they in the whole process?
Look again. quoting former ambassador of Ukraine to the United States, because again, I've just listened to what he was saying. There are so many different signals from the U.S., from Washington, so it's actually difficult, to comment on every statement from administration, every move from administration. Very, very difficult. But I think, well, the United States, first of all, since Trump election, they are no strategic, well, I would say they are no ally of the US. They depicted their role as mediator. We see now that this mediation role doesn't work. So we don't know how US will continue to behave. Yes, they are threatening that they would withdraw from this mediation role. But the question, if it happens, what would be positions of the United States? Whether they will return to the position of the ally of Ukraine, or they can say, well, we wash our hands. Now continue your direct negotiations with Mr. Putin. Definitely it will play into the hands of Putin. Again, so far, position of Trump is, well, he was saying, Putin, aye, Vladimir, don't do that. Trump is saying that, he's angry at what Russians are doing. But again, what would be the real steps from
Exactly.
United States?
So my last question would go to you about the Ukrainian strategy. As we know, Volodymyr Zelensky paid a visit to Prague. Yesterday, he was greeted there as a war hero, and he was talking about the Czech ammunition initiative and possible reconstruction of Ukraine. So he said that the war could end at any moment. What exactly is the strategy of Ukraine here, and to what concessions is Zelensky willing to agree?
Well, the strategy of Zelensky, look, he needs to increase support for Ukraine, and actually the Czech Republic played very important role here, because they have already conducted one so-called initiatives about shells. So basically they were trying to find all the shells necessary for Ukraine throughout the world. And they kind of built a coalition of countries, well, not formal coalition of countries, who were helping with these initiatives, in finding a necessary amount of ammunition, of shells, to supply to Ukraine. So basically now President Zelensky is saying about possibility, to repeat this initiative, maybe not only regarding shells, but also other kind of weapons and ammunition. And moreover, it was reported that during this agreement there was a decision to create joint Czech-Ukrainian school in the Czech Republic, where there would be training for Ukrainian pilots of F-16. And well, somehow it coincides with new decision in the US that they are going to sell to Ukraine a technical package of weapons, ammunitions and details for F-16. So it coincides in time, so not bad, I would say. But again, definitely we need increase of supply of weapons to Ukraine.
Olexiy Haran, Research Advisor, Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, sir.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks, but please stay tuned to TVP World for more features.